Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing Rambo Last Blood. This was directed by Aidan Gunberg and stars Sylvester Stallone among many. This film really looks at John Rambo and where he is now after the events of the last film. It's been 10 years or so since him returning home, and it really looks at how every one of his family members is gone. Ultimately all he has is his niece and her grandmother. He's living on a ranch, he's sort of breaking horses and training horses, and is ultimately just living a simple and normal life. He's still scarred by the events that have transpired for him through the previous years and Vietnam itself. And it looks at how he sort of sleeps on the ground in this sort of bunker with lots of tunnels. And it's his only place he feels comfortable and safe. He never sleeps inside the house. This is just his sort of refuge, I guess. And he's always haunted by nightmares, and he has trouble sleeping. And it really looks at how he's struggling and suffering from PTSD and taking medication for it. And ultimately the film looks at how, his niece disappears, and it's about him trying to track her down and work out what happened to her. And a lot of things happen to him along the way. And it all leads to quite a brutal and violent ending. This Rambo wasn't quite what I expected it to be, but I still enjoyed it. There's a lot of elements I enjoyed and stuff I really connected to and liked what they ultimately were doing with the evolving story of John Rambo. The way this differs from the other Rambo films is ultimately it's sort of a Western. It really feels like a Western. Films like Shane and Unforgiven. But it also looks at an aging man, like an aging gunfighter, like something Peckinpah would do, especially with Ride the High Country and movies like that, where he looked at the changing and evolving world and how these men were from a different period and different time, and they weren't sort of as relevant as they used to be, but they still had one more fight in them. And that's sort of what this film really feels like. It feels like Rambo still has one fight left in him. Even though he's found a place to be and he's at home, he still feels lost, and I kind of like that element to it. And the extremes he goes to and ultimately to try and track down and save his niece is just extraordinary to watch and very powerful on screen. The way this differs as well is there's a lot more heart here. It feels like a film about heart and the heart of Rambo and the heart of the Rambo storyline. And it sort of feels simple, like it's gone back to the way the first film was, a very simple and contained story about Rambo and where he finds himself and how he's still trying to find a place to fit in. There's things about this film I liked and things I didn't. So I'll start with the positives. I really like the opening sequence where we find Rambo he's volunteering trying to find lost hikers up in the mountains during a storm and this big flood. And that's a really great way to reintroduce the character to the Rambo world, and I really like that. And you really get a sense of who he is, and when he's unable to save someone, he feels responsible, and it's always about trying to save people all the time, and that's his main focus. And then we sort of get to see him now and living on the ranch and what his life is like, and I kind of like that. I really like how they built the relationship between Rambo and his niece. I thought that was really great, and Rambo feels more like a father to her than her uncle, because her father hasn't been around for a long time and he's a very nice man and her mother's dead. So it really looks at the bond that these two have formed and how she's like his heart. She represents everything to him that's important. And when she gets taken away, it's like his heart's been ripped out, and I really like that element as well. And I really feel the last 10-15 minutes really feels like the Rambo movies we've grown to know and love. And it doesn't disappoint the end of this. He ultimately John Wicks the ending, and I really love that. I think that was such a great sequence. So the start and that is brilliant. And slowly throughout the film, when we start to see him become that Rambo we all know, and just the way he goes about it, and he's quite brutal with the way he sort of gathers information from people. It's quite shocking to watch, and it's definitely worth the R rating that it ultimately has. I like that Rambo's his old man now, and he's not as capable and as quick and as strong as he used to be, but it's still in there. And then it's the idea that he hasn't sort of dealt with the things that happened to him. He's sort of put a lid on it. He's trying to contain it. And then ultimately when his niece disappears, this is when he can't contain it anymore and the lid blows off. And he ultimately becomes Rambo, and he goes back to all the training he had from the army and his perseverance. No matter what happens, he's going to accomplish his goals. And it's sort of the first time, not that it's a spoil, but it's the first time he really sort of gets his ass handed to him in a particular scene on a rooftop. It's quite brutal what happens to him, but it's an interesting thing because it shows he's not a young man anymore, but he still has that strength in him. He still has that trained, aggressive soldier hidden deep within him, and I really like that. Now for the things I didn't quite enjoy as much. Even though I liked the building relationship between Rambo and his niece, I think they spent a little too much time with this, to the point that when we're introduced to new characters, they only serve a little bit of purpose in the story. We don't really know a lot about them. In one particular character, there's Paz Vega. She plays a sort of a journalist, and it's kind of an interesting thing. She helps Rambo a couple of times in the film, but she only served a small purpose. I thought her being a journalist could serve a much bigger purpose. I thought she could be working on an article, or she could be something really interesting and could expose this particular cartel, but they don't really do anything with her. And I think that's due to the fact the film isn't long enough to expand on these particular characters in a way I feel it could. And the cartel's sort of the cliched Mexican cartel, you know, who sell drugs and do prostitution, and there's a lot of violence with them, but they're a bit cliche. There isn't a lot of depth to them. Yeah, they try and do a little bit of building with the two brothers, the main focus of their cartel, but I just felt they didn't really do much with them, and they didn't really serve much of purpose except for an adversary against Rambo. I can't really put my finger on it, but there's something that felt like it was missing from the film. It didn't really feel like the Rambo that I've always known and loved. And the previous film I felt was a really great orchestrated film in such a short period of time. This felt like there's a lot of story to tell, but there was too short of a period to tell it, and I think that was another thing that let the film down. And because it felt more like a Western than a war film, I think that took a little bit away from who John Rambo was and why we loved him so much, and the character he ultimately is within these films. And the other thing is, this film is very violent, ultra violent. Like the previous film, yes, that was quite violent as well, but it was sort of digital blood and it was a bit fake looking. This is so real in so many ways. I think it's a little too violent, even though it does feel like Rambo just feels it's a bit much. And I think that took me out of it a little bit, feel a bit removed from the storyline when these sequences are happening. Overall, I thought it was a good contributing storyline to the already Rambo universe that we've ultimately grown to know. Rambo was evolving a little bit, and he's still, the struggles that we see with him I thought was kind of interesting to watch. I think Stallone's still great. He's a man in his 70s, but he can still play such a tough and sturdy character, being the ones that really formed his career. And he's so respectful and loving of these, and this comes across in this film. Final thoughts. Look, this is not really a spoiler, but it feels like he doesn't win again in this film. It feels like in all the movies, all the Rambo movies, Rambo never really wins except for the last film where he finally decides to go home. And I thought that was a really perfect ending. I don't know, I just feel like you need to allow this character to win a little bit in some ways, because he's such a damaged man and such a man that's a product of violence and a horrific sort of experience that he had, that you just want him to be happy, I guess, or find a place to fit in and be part of. And this film doesn't really allow that again for him. This film is the only one that sort of hits you with a real emotional punch. This niece represents his heart. It's the only thing he really cares about, and the only thing he has in his life. She's really the heart of the film. And when things happen to her, that's when you're saddened and you feel his heart slowly breaking and then ultimately be ripped out of his chest. And I really liked that. I thought that was a great metaphor for the whole film. I'm going to give Rambo Last Blood 3.5 out of 5. It was solid. I enjoyed my experience with it. It just wasn't as good as a previous film, but I think it's a solid film nonetheless. And if you're a fan of the Rambo series, you should definitely go and check this out. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.